So hello, everyone. The big item is our 1.7 roadmap. I want everyone to sort of agree to that or make me stop before I present it to the TOC. I want to get any feedback on the sidecar bootstrap command that comes out of um, uh, some work on getting sidecars that are running on VMs to join the mesh. And then we're going to talk about the testing. I don't think there'll be any time for status updates, except for the fact that that is one of the things that's a P0. So if actually Mitch demoed it, it would actually fulfill Shweta's request that we do it. So if there's anything else we need to do, please add it. I'm going to try to walk through the roadmap. So I put this up. We agreed last meeting that for 1.7, we want to focus on this troubleshooting API, which is going to fix so many problems we have now with security and multi-cluster. And we're going to continue to harden the stuff with dual control. So there was a meeting some of us had just to get this under control, myself, Mitch, and Liam, on the troubleshooting API. I've now made a work item for that. I'm hoping we make it P0 for 1.7. Currently, that issue just points to the architecture and API that were proposed last year. So let me just link to that to remind everyone what we're talking about. So Istio supports this debug method to get things like proxy status. Are the proxies acting correctly? That we use for some of our subcommands. So last year, we had proposals from Romain, this API, how it's going to work to allow Envoy to tell us what, or to let Istio tell us what Envoy is saying. We're now talking about, and also to deal with the sharding issues. And it was proposed as gRPC, and there was proposed to be a architecture for it. Anyway, this work probably needs to be sort of redone, and my hope is that myself, Mitch, and Liam can get something approved for this very soon. What do you think, guys? So the goals of the API are going to be to replace this debug functionality, or maybe we'll keep that in for a release, but it will be a replacement. This API will be able to return unsharded results because we won't be able to exec into every pod when we're running outside the mesh, etc. We want to be able
I think maybe those two contradict each other, unless we're going to do it on a different path. I think those two contradict each other unless we're going to do it on a different path, right? Because the current API doesn't, or do you mean backwards compatibility there, or do you mean it should cover the same use cases?
So I think that we need to just preserve this /debug unchanged, but I'm just thinking there'd be a new V2 or something, whatever it's called, that gives us the new thing, and then we deprecate the old one as soon as we like the new one well enough.
Okay, sounds reasonable.
But we want to be able to do these uncharted ones because of execing in. We don't want to do that. We're expecting, Istio is running in another Kubernetes cluster, or it's running on a VM. We can't get onto all the instances. All we have is an endpoint, so we can't use any strategy that's not that has sharded results. We want this config dump functionality so that there's no need to exec into sidecars to improve our security, and we have to work. And the caveat is that means we're going to be able not only to implement all this, but there's a little piece that the injector will need to do as well, because right now the injector just tells what revision is a pod has been injected by. It does not tell us where to find that. You have to hunt into the parameters passed into the sidecar to find the endpoint. So might need a mechanism to find it, which could be in a number of places, but we want to do that. And so we need to move it elsewhere. And the other, I mean, it could be attached to the namespace, or it could be attached to the Istio operator resource that we now write out, or it could be attached to the pod. But someone needs to give us a declarative endpoint that we can talk to. So in addition to agreeing on this API, we are going to need an implementation of it. I created a work item for that as well. Was Mitch or Liam, did you guys, which one of you offered to start that?
I think on the API side, as far as integration with Kubernetes, we were talking about, I think Liam was going to be taking the lead there. I was working on the way that we get the information unsharded within the cluster.
I think the split specifically may have been I'm working on the actual server, so the API interface and implementing that, and Jason was working on the kube aggregation layer. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Jason. I'm just giving you work.
Yeah, I was going to say the analysis at the endpoint.
So we wanted to do that as gRPC with HT bindings. We have to agree about security. And I wanted to ask about how this would work in multi-cluster. So if we're in a single cluster, it makes great sense to put this somewhere in the Kubernetes API and expose it that way. If we are running multi-cluster and we are not the control plane cluster, do we want, I think we want this to work even if we don't have access into the cluster that's running the control plane. So if I'm running Istio as a service in a remote control plane, I don't have to give access to my service control plane. Or do we not think that's going to be possible for 1.7? If it can't go through the Kubernetes server, like in the case of VMs, we probably need to make this mechanism be just some endpoint, and there needs to be some tunnel into it that we can just take to talk directly to this unsharded view.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're talking about a fallback plan for exposing the API. In which case, I think we would more or less just kick that to the user. We create a service that no one has access to, and tell them that if they want to configure access, they have all of the tools of Istio's authn and authz at their disposal. It's not ideal. Ideally, it goes through the kube aggregation layer, and then they can use Kubernetes authn and authz to control access, which is going to be a very familiar interface.
An issue with this proposal from the beginning is, it's from the UX working group, but I have still not seen, like, I would love to see a very clear path of what exactly the change to the user experience will be. We keep focusing on the implementation details like gRPC, whatever, but at the end of the day, that's all worthless if we want to know what the user's changing. And I personally don't think that we need.
So for 1.7, the hope is that we change nothing.
This will be
1.7, for 1.7, the hope is that proxy status, describe, and wait all work from the user point of view as being unchanged. Too much work by volunteering to write it. volunteered to do the client side, but we need someone to do the server side. And Liam and Mitch sort of stepped up saying that they thought it could be done.
What's the point though? Like, I mean, we're doing all this work. We're saying there's no user benefit, and you cut out for a second, so maybe I missed the part. But I mean, I still don't actually get the point of all this work.
I think that the difference is the security posture. Right now, debugging Istio requires a security posture that is essentially root to the cluster. That's
so
not
if you're going to make the claim that we're doing all this work for a security change, we need to be very explicit on what are the security requirements. Because you just said like, maybe we'll let them throw up Istio RBAC, maybe Kubernetes RBAC. I mean, if the motivation for this is security, then we need to be very clear on what the security model of this is.
Yeah, I agree, and we are collaborating with the security working group on that. I pitched that to the work group leads, and they've approved that it'll be part of their roadmap as well.
Just about security, though, don't we want to also be able to have diagnostics across multi-cluster? I mean, I thought that was part of what this is. Maybe I misunderstood the work as it's been described.
So that's a good point. There's not a lot in terms of multi-cluster diagnostics that don't work today that would work with V1 of this implementation. Specifically, the path that's hard for multi-cluster is contacting proxies. There is a design present in Ramon's original document involving communication between the proxies and pilot that I think has some value, but it's going to take more than this release to accomplish that. Does that make sense, Steve?
So we do have more. We can have features that span multiple releases. I mean, generally we've broken them up in the past into analyze and then implement phase 1 and phase 2. We did this with the build system, which is still like in implementation, and we're almost done, hopefully today. I don't know, but I think that is an example that can be followed. It doesn't have to be all done in 1.7. Just bite off a part you feel you can handle.
Yeah, so that's exactly what we've done here.
My thought is that can be very small. So we already have a debug API. All we need to do is unshard that and expose it. Regarding security, I think that we should sort of punt it. We should offer this thing through the Kube API, and we should offer it through, when we say we're going to kick it to the user, what we mean is that maybe they make an SSH tunnel for this to work or something, that we just don't try to set up a secure model for it, but that everything will work if you have done that. So the server-side code should be small.
There's a difference between, so making that tunnel in a kube world today would be a port forward permission, right? Which is less of a permission than an exec.
Yes, but it's port forward for Kubernetes, and then you use something like this to talk to it. And if it's VMs, you can have some SSH tunnel, or if you're running Istio as a service and Istio is not running in the same cluster, you don't give access to it, something like this, where you set up maybe a reflector in your cluster that you manage, and you port forward to that, and that cluster knows how to talk to this debug API in the same way that a regular pod knows how to talk to XDS.
Would you say this is an intersection of security and multi-cluster and usability? I mean, it seems like it involves all of those three things to me.
It definitely involves all three, and we all need to talk about them sort of together. So, yeah. So I had drawn some pictures up that I sort of showed some others, just imagining a hack doing this without any changes, right? So say you couldn't touch STOD at all, you were just trying to make this happen in 1.6. You could sort of have a pod running in your cluster, you could exec into it, you could have a pod running in the cluster and the remote control plane that sort of does the stepping through all the shards. This is fairly simple if you trust this link. You could also, if you had some kind of all shards endpoint where these guys were already sort of having the stepping through the cluster on their own, that would sort of work. So I imagine, doing this as a proof of concept in a small amount of code, and then if it was, but then when I talked to Liam and when I talked to everyone else, they said, well, we should do it correctly. We should put some endpoints in and get some agreement on them. And I think this is containable for 1.7, but it does need.
You have that slide, those slides available somewhere?
They're available somewhere. I will put them into the proposal issue.
Like I said, I think that'll help.
Okay. So that was one piece of our 1.7 roadmap. Should we move on? Yep. So the next piece is the delete of Istio. Now, Martin O tells me that the operator is already able to do this. So this should be pretty easy. So I made it a P1 and assigned myself to it. Any objections to having istio manifest approve or istio uninstall? Any preference to one or the other in terms of naming?
Just I'd make is to guard it, so people don't uninstall it unintentionally, even though.
There should always be a "Are you sure?" type argument, the same way that apply has, because you don't want people to just type apply to see what it is and have it go, so you just have a new version. But yes, we'll have the same gating on this that we do for the other istio manifest commands.
So for manifest remove, would you need to supply the manifest in order for it to know what exactly to be removing?
You mean like revisions or what? So we wrote out, whenever we did the install, we wrote out the Istio operator when we did the install. So when you remove, probably you're removing, I mean, today or not, but if we put this in 1.7, when you installed 1.6, you got this operator there. So what we're removing is essentially one of those things that we previously installed. We have all of the parameters that were used when we installed it, because we have the operator, and we can use that code to rebuild all of the Kubernetes resources that we created. So then it's just a matter of deleting things in the right order.
Okay, that sounds good.
I had done an initial implementation of this for 1.5, and it didn't work because in 1.5, the first thing we did was create the namespace. And so the first thing we deleted was the namespace, and then everything else was already deleted and it was complaining. And then it deleted the CRs, and then it messed up multiple control planes. So a lot of this is about making the experience not be surprising if you have two control planes and you remove one of them. And you're going to do that a lot, right, for rolling back and probably for canarying stuff. So, and what we haven't talked about and should is, if you like your canary, are you supposed to then upgrade your main control plane with the same parameters as the canary? Or you sort of say, make the canary my new master and delete the old master? I would want to hear what people's opinions are on that from a UX point of view. I'm saying, right? Are we going to promote a canary to be master, or are we going to just upgrade master because we trust it, the settings that we applied on the canary?
This is during the uninstall?
No, but it's related, right? So if you're doing canarying of your control plane, you've done the install of the master, you've done the install of the canary, you've tested on the canary, now you want to delete something. Do you want to delete the master and make the canary the master? Do you want to canary to become the master, then having just a remove is not enough. Is there a Istio cuddle promote canary to master command? Do we want something like that? Or how, when you like your canary, do you stop canarying?
As far as I understand it, canary is just a label, right? It's not a first class concept in Istio cuddle.
It's just a label, but it has one other thing, which is that it catches the default injector.
Okay. So then the process of promoting a canary just looks like relabeling the canary revision to be master.
Pretty much.
My thought is as little magic as possible, so that users have control and understanding of what's going on. Maybe we have a task-oriented guide that says, step 1, relabel the master to legacy. Step 2, relabel the canary to master. Step 3, delete legacy, or something along those lines, where they have a lot of control of what's going on. Because with big changes like this, automagical stuff goes wrong pretty easily, or you just don't understand the implications of a change that you're making.
So I agree. Currently, we don't have any logic for that, but we could do this logic. It should not be impossible. And I would look, I'm not sure which group should be doing the design of this. I can design how I think it might work, but we should probably iterate on it a few times over the coming meetings, and we need to get Costin to agree to it, because when I talked to him yesterday on Slack, he had different opinions than I had about some things, so I had to learn some things too. I want to make sure that we do this in a way that everyone on networking likes.
Yeah.
So I'll just put a P question mark on this idea of how we promote, and we'll have to talk about that offline after we've thought about it. Shall we move on to the additional multiple control plane improvements?
Sounds good.
So we hoped to get done for 1.6 and didn't. This idea that proxy status should work better without revision. Currently, we just ask all of the control planes, if you leave off the label, off the flag. If you supply the flag, we just ask that one. There, which is a waste. If you supply the pod argument, we should ask just the one. That's pretty easy, and we need to do that for the troubleshooting API. So I've assigned myself that item and made it a P0 because Costin was very adamant that it should work that way yesterday. I wanted to talk a little bit about istio-cuddle wait, because when I was thinking about it and talking about it yesterday with Costin, I realized that there's a flaw in how wait might work when we have multiple control planes or control planes that are running outside the mesh, like on VMs or if it's a service or multi-cluster. So the idea is if we had a lot of control planes running, like every tenant has their own control plane, or we have some failed canary experiments running, it can be a real hassle to ask all of them when we're waiting, because you don't want to wait for what you sort of need. Wait works great if there's a single control plane. Wait works good enough if there's just two and they're both in the same cluster. If they're not in the cluster, if we don't want to ask, we don't want to inventory all the control planes by asking every pod who injected you. We need to know what the control planes are for wait. And then I have this thought experiment. Suppose we're running a client in the canary and a server in the master. When you apply a destination rule and you have a script to wait to test it, you want to sort of ask the canary, has everybody seen this rule? But when you apply authentication policy, you sort of want to ask the master, has everybody seen this rule, before you can test it? So we want to describe how this should work in the corner cases.
So it seems like in these cases, it's really the user is directing which control plane is of interest, right?
Well, right. So currently it just works, and it also takes the minus revisions. So if you know what you're doing, you can slightly get better performance. But what I had learned yesterday and didn't know was that now there's a way to make destination rules apply only to one control plane. It would just be good to have an understanding of what this should do, what the user expects it to do.
Yeah, I would need to understand the use case for making a destination rule apply to only one control plane.
We can ignore that because I don't think that's important. Maybe it is. It really surprised me. But the thing is that when you apply destination rule, you don't have to wait for your master to see it because only the client needs to know about destination rules. This shouldn't be a problem. There's only a few Istio Ds that we need to ask about this. The problem, I think, is if one of your control planes has seized up, is timing out, that kind of thing. If a control plane is bad and some pod uses it, then it's bad to wait for it. So we want to make sure that it's at least hard enough, that the command is hardened enough that if we're using wait, that we don't give up because some failed canary is keeping us from noticing the things that don't require that failed canary.
Yeah, so I see the revision flag is present on wait. That seems like a great way to avoid waiting on a canary. As far as the sort of intelligent, when a destination rule, only wait for control planes that have clients that will leverage that destination rule. Wait is not a smart system like that. It doesn't know what a particular config is relevant to, whether it's relevant for clients or relevant for servers. It simply says, has a config at this at the version that this destination rule was created at been distributed to proxies, whether it was relevant to the proxy or not.
I agree. The only reason I bring this up is that Costin and I had a disagreement about what happens if you leave revision off. So if you apply revision, it works exactly as we want. If you leave it off, it asks all the control planes. And the only question is that we just need to say, yes, that's our opinionated viewpoint, that if you leave revision off, we always ask all control planes. Or we have to say no, that we find the correct control plane. Perhaps, I don't know.
See, perhaps in a multi-revision scenario, simply detecting the presence of multiple revisions and erroring. Sort of the way that Kubernetes does. If you request logs on a pod that has more than one container, it'll tell you you've got to specify the container name.
Or maybe we just say you can supply a namespace and it will use whatever the revision is for that namespace, and it's just that way you don't have to remember which namespaces are attached to which revisions.
I don't think there's a deterministic one-to-one mapping between namespaces and revisions, unfortunately.
The injector feels there is. So in any event, those are the things we want for 1.7. Are there other items that we feel are P0 or P1 for 1.7 that I should add to this? Is there anything people are working on? If not, that's great. So one item that we should mention that could be a 1.7 item is this pull, which is implements this sidecar bootstrap command. So this command lets a VM join the mesh SSHing onto a VM and running Docker to run a sidecar there. I encourage everyone to sort of look at that and review it. I have reviewed it several times. There were several strong concerns. My hope is that we either like it or don't. I know Shriram likes it, and it comes from someone who hasn't contributed before that I know of. So we want to get this person to enjoy the experience of working with us. Her name is Security Insanity. That's not her real name. I forgot what it is. It starts with a C.
Cynthia.
Cynthia.
Yeah.
I encourage everyone to read it. I put some just like what I thought the best command names were and the requests to improve the documentation on it. The function seemed fine. There were comments from Austin, but I would ask other people who feel that this should work a certain way to either approve it, even if your approval isn't needed, just so we can get like a vote for what we think of it. Because I think it'd be great to get in, because it would certainly help Tetrate and the people who are doing stuff outside of Kubernetes. And we don't want to just be tied into that. Shweta pointed out that we want our P0 items to be tested, maybe even during this call. She thought we should make the whole meeting be about that. And so I want to remind everyone what the P0s are. It's the Istio Cuddle manifest commands, like apply, all take a revision so that we can do multiple control planes. Set revision equals canary. And I think I've convinced Martin to make it offer as a substitute just minus revision equals canary. The troubleshooting commands all take a minus revision now. So I would encourage everyone to sort of install either from master or from beta 0 two control planes, a regular one and a revision equals canary, and just see if you can label or install book info in two places, label each one for the master and one for the canary, see if the troubleshooting commands work for you, and that kind of thing. I have done this. Hopefully I haven't broken it lately. It worked for me. There's a PR that's still outstanding for how Analyze is supposed to work with these labels. But we want this to work. The final P0 is the status fields on CRs, which you have to enable with a flag, and Mitch implemented it. Do we want to do any of this testing here live, possibly the status updates, so that we get a demo out of it and also fulfill Shweta's requirement, or do we want to do this ourselves and sort of report in?
And what I would like is for, we've got a pull request out for this doc that should be present in time for the community testing day on, what is that, Monday? So I'd like to wait until that doc is fully available and approved so that we can follow those steps and make sure, like if you're following steps that I give you interactively, that's sort of cheating. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Could you possibly link that PR doc here and have us actually try that PR out?
Absolutely, we'll do.
That would be a good thing to do. So let me, I hadn't thought of doing a live demo on this call. Let me see if I can do one. So, you can see that I have an Istio D running here. So there's a new feature I've added. If you do kubectl get Istio operator all namespaces, it tells you which operators you've installed, and I've added this revision column here. And I found out yesterday from Costin that revision might not be user-facing, but I made it user-facing by putting it here. So what you can do is say Istio Cuddle, manifest, apply, set, revision equals canary, and it should install one. Note that it didn't say, are you sure? That's because it never says, are you sure if you do a set. I'm not sure if that's still the correct behavior, but that's the way it works now. So we can see John Howard's animated UI, which is awesome. It looks much cleaner now. You can see the work happening. Hopefully it'll finish up in a moment. Installation complete. Now when I do the get Istio operator, we can see that there are two Istios, and we can see the revision label right here. This gives you an idea of what you can supply to the minus revision in Istio Cuddle. So if I look at the pods, we can see that I'm running two IstioDs, and we're only running one gateway, which is, I believe, how we do it. And I'm not sure if that's right, but it's always been for me. I haven't done a lot of actually testing the gateway in the canary. So if I do Istio Cuddle, let me delete my book info. And then reapply it just so that it runs. Let me create a namespace. So now I am installing book info into a second namespace. So I should have all of these working. If I do proxy status, I should see all of the book infos here. Currently, it does not tell you, and maybe it should, which revision reported this information. I should ask about that. Do we think it should, we didn't make any of these commands take new or supply new output. Do we want to show the revision here? I don't know. But you can see that the number of responses to proxy status is 15. If I do this with revision canary, it should show only the canary ones. If I do it with revision quote, I believe it should show only, does it show all of them? No. Shows all of them. If I show revision default, it shows just the master ones. So is this the behavior we want to? So I think if you leave off revision, showing all revisions, it's great. I think if you are only debugging a particular control plane, I think that's great. I'm not super excited about having to put revision default in because I want it to sort of match what you see when you do Istio operator, which doesn't put a revision here. What do we think of this behavior, and has anyone else tried it?
And I think the revision field being, I haven't tried your revision flag that the field you've added. I haven't seen that. That's new to me. But certainly it being blank and then it being default is inconsistent, right? That doesn't make any sense. Agree or disagree?
I agree. It's easy to fix. That default thing caught me by surprise because early versions had simply not put a value in the revision label on the master. And I had sort of asked for that so that I could distinguish them easily with a single query. And that was done nicely by the environments people. But then they started using the word default if ever it was blank, which I'd simply never revised my work to do. So I would ask, not should it be consistent? Yes, it should be consistent. My question is, should it say default here as well? And this be the same, or what? Or should there be a minus minus master flag that means revision default? If we need any special behavior, we should make it. It's just a 1 or 2 line change, and it can easily go into 1.6 before people start testing.
Okay, I think they need to be consistent. I think adding a flag is not really ideal because then it's a permanent API fixture that we may not want, if that makes sense to you.
I'm happy to put revision here. I mean that we just Martin wrote the code just to write this. So what happens is that these two items are, I call them a bill of materials. It's just what the user supplied, and we use it for verify install. So Istio Cuddle, is it verify install? If you do it like this, it checks to see, are all the resources still there? Did you delete them? Are they not running? This kind of thing. And if you do that with revision canary, it will check the same ones. And it does that by sort of going out to the cluster and getting that previously installed bill of materials, running the operator code that produced this list again, and then running the code that we had in previous version of Istio. Remember, in earlier versions of Istio, you were expected when you installed to save a copy of the YAML manifest you installed with to use this verify install command, which was a huge pain because everybody forgot to do that or what options they had used when they had installed. So this is supposed to be a big improvement. All you need to do is tell it your revision name and it just sort of works. But there may be some holes in the difference between the empty and the revision field.
So I've not done verify install with the revisions, and when you use default there, does it select on default or what does it select exactly? Oh, you've got it up.
Right. I believe that this code, unlike the code that contacts the control plane, where leaving revision off means every control plane, I think that currently leaving revision off in this one means the blank or default control plane. There's no verify install minus all control planes. Maybe there should be, but we sort of designed this and implemented this, and then while we did that, the way that these manifests worked and the way that the templates worked was changing. So there may be some things that either we fix right before the release or we fix now, but I think they'd be very small. We fix them in 1.6.1.
Your suggestion of testing would be good, just to catch any of these revision problems. Yeah, that would be really. I think it's a really good suggestion. Unfortunately, it seems like most of the working group is left.
Yeah. Well, I see that. Yeah, I see the usual suspects here. So those are the materials that I have to talk about today. Do we have any other stuff that we should talk about, or are there anything that we want to talk about for the next meeting in 2 weeks?
Ed, I think that sounds good. It sounds like we've got what we need for the TOC meeting, which is in a week and a half, to cover our 1.7 roadmap. Is that right?
Yeah, although we want to get John and Howard and Constant to like what we were talking about for the troubleshooting. Because if we make that the center point and they hate it, then that gives us nothing to do for 1.7.
Okay, should we set up some other meetings to follow up on that, or?
Yes, you and I, or possibly you and I and Liam should have some kind of proposal that we should get Constant to put his checkbox on. So what we need to do is maybe, so the work item that I had proposed was to make this document and get it approved. But even before we have a document that we need to get approved, we should have a pre-document that people like the way we're going with this, so that we don't spend a lot of time getting all the commas and API fields right, and that we just say, do we want an API that knows about shards and handles that on behalf of the user for these cases that we think are important? And is it enough to just expose what we have in the debug API that way, or should we do all the stuff with the envoys we talked about? And is it enough that we just assume the user either has a VM in a tunnel, or they have a Kubernetes and they have API extension? We want to just get the high level stuff approved, and then we do the low level stuff.
Okay. What do you think the next step is there?
Could you just write up what you think is sufficient to describe this, but good enough that Costin can like it, make a few small suggestions, and then we can move forward with the detailed one? And then
Sounds
we have a meeting with him and possibly others, such as Lynn or other people, to see what they think.
Sounds like maybe an RFC style document.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do.
Okay, well, great, everyone. Thank you for attending. I'll turn off the recorder.